video that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep, and that the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in the rear driver's side.
Recently released video has the potential to completely upend the YNW Melly murder case. We're seeing for the first time what actually transpired with Bortlen and Melly that evening. Here's the twist though. Once they reached that dead end, someone made the decision to turn on his friend. On October 26, 2018, the murder of 2 best friends began like any other night in the trap. Young entrepreneurs are working hard in the studio, avoiding obstacles and pursuing their objectives. By dawn, however, their day one friend would be sitting in county on double murder charges, and 2 young kings would be dead, in one of hip-hop's most ruthless betrayals. This is the true tale of how celebrity, wealth, and street politics transformed friendship into violence. Since they were shorties racing in Gifford, Florida, the YNW crew had been close. It's a tough hood where you either survive or die trying. With his hit song Murder on My Mind, YNW Melly Jamal Demons had been going viral, and the streets were paying attention. However, he was beginning to feel some genuine stress with his day ones as a result of all that accomplishment. Since they were young, Melly had been riding with YNW Sack Hazer, Anthony Williams, 21, and YNW Juvie Christopher Thomas Jr., 19, who all came up together in the same struggle. That document was the main focus of the months-long feud. Melly's friends felt abandoned after he signed a contract with 3 Entertainment in July 2018. For a sum of between $200,000 and $500,000, Sackheiser is seen shoving Melly for his share in text chats that the feds eventually discovered. He writes directly, "You blowing up? Are we still consuming crumbs? Do you pay, or are we done?" In an area like Gifford, loyalty was paramount, and betraying someone could get you smoked without a doubt. The YNW collective had come out of this setting with a connection created by their common experiences of abuse, poverty, and flight. Together, they had endured arrests, witnessed friends being killed on the streets, and helped one another get through the rigors of attempting to succeed in the music business. They functioned as a cohesive team for years, believing that if one person succeeded, everyone else would follow suit. However, the music industry has the power to transform people. Additionally, Melly's quick rise to stardom was causing relationships that had previously appeared impenetrable to fall apart. His partnership with Kanye West on Mixed Personalities elevated him to a new level and gave him access to opportunities that his boyhood pals were unable to share. The high-profile collaborations, exotic automobiles, and pricey chains that came with major label success stood in sharp contrast to the daily hardships his friends were still dealing with in Gifford. They were also complicating street politics and their blood-affiliated set. As members of the Gifford Slimes or YNW Bloods, the crew functioned in a hierarchical structure where resources and respect were allocated according to status and contribution. These established power structures were being upended by Melly's personal success, which infuriated not only his close friends and family but also the larger gang network. It was becoming impossible to reconcile. The conflict between allegiance to the set and loyalty to childhood friends.
The vibes look decent, I'm gonna be honest with you. It don't look like nobody kind of beefing, nobody look too excited. You know, if somebody kind of got into it, like, they might be like, they're not just walking normal. Like, everybody looks kind of chill.
Group was working on new heat at New Era Recording Studios on that fateful night. The security cameras captured what appeared to be another night with the squad when it was time to bounce. However, genuine streets are aware of the depths of quiet waters, and some lethal things were about to happen underneath all that cool composure. The cameras captured the 4 guys dipping out of the studio.
This is Sack Chaser. Where does he get in? Good. Remember they said it was a gray vehicle. He gets into, this is Juvie, I said, right? He gets into the front right side.
Together at 4:08 a.m., the entire tale of who was riding shotgun to their own death would eventually be revealed by the manner they sat in. The gray Jeep Compass that they had hired can be seen entering what the streets would refer to as the death seat in the...
Melly comes, and Melly goes to the back passenger. Yeah.
Video. Meanwhile, Melly was captured on tape sneaking into what would subsequently be described by prosecutors as the ideal position for an execution, directly behind the vehicle, where he could catch both of his targets slipping. The district attorney's office claims that this placement was not an accident. Prosecutors say Melly began busing from his back left location from 4:10 to 4:20 a.m. as they traveled through some back roads close to Miramar Parkway. It happened so quickly that his friends had no time to comprehend what was going on.
He even shot through the seat multiple times, and there was no defense wounds to be like, stop. You get me? It was that quick. Bang, 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 bang. That quick. When
8 shots were fired at Sackheiser, including deadly strikes to the chest, neck, and dome. Juvie was hit by 4 gunshots, all of which caused comparable fatalities. stippling, or unburned gunpowder, was discovered on the entry wounds during the autopsy, indicating that these shots were fired at close range. Because there were no defensive wounds, neither victim anticipated it. Until the final minute, they most likely believed they were simply riding with their brother. Even seasoned homicide investigators were taken aback by the medical examiner's findings, which revealed a picture of planned violence, with enough velocity to blow out the front passenger glass. Zach Azer's fatal head wound entered in the rear of his skull and exited through the top. Juvie was shot at close range in the left cheek. Based on the trajectory of the bullet, it appears that he was facing forward at the time of the shot. Both victims were totally oblivious of the danger behind them, based on the angles and placement of the wounds. The apparent premeditation behind the crime added to its horrifying nature. The site selection, a remote place devoid of surveillance cameras or witnesses, suggested careful preparation. The fact that both victims were shot more than once, with more shots going through the seats, suggested that this was a planned execution rather than an act of passion. The gunman had total surprise on his side, as evidenced by the absence of any struggle or defensive wounds. The actual extent of the purported plot was exposed in the wake of the shooting. Later, forensic examination would reveal that multiple gunshots discovered in the car had been fired after the victims had passed away, indicating that the crime scene was set up as soon as the killings took place. This degree of preparation and execution suggested that the criminal had considered every facet of the crime, from the original assault to the subsequent cover, dash-up after the bodies fell. However, the truly heartless portion began. What transpired next, according to the DA, proves that this was a cold-blooded, well-planned murder. The claimed shooter smoked his friends, then drove to a far-off location, got out, and began firing the whip from the outside. They made it appear as though someone had driven by using a different piece.
To stage the shooting, because they believe people were already dead, they hopped out the car and then they shot up the car afterwards, and they believe those bullet casings they found at that spot was a .40 caliber.
2 corpses were in the ride when YNW Bortlen arrived at Memorial Hospital Miramar. At 4:35 a.m. Melly was a ghost, allegedly picked up from wherever they staged the fictitious shooting, and Bortlen was left to drop off the dead and sell their narrative. While Homie was calm as a cucumber when he told the physicians and police that they had been hit in a drive by social media was the smoking gun used by the prosecution. When news of the killings spread, individuals began approaching Melly to inquire about his well-being. Prosecutors claim that Melly's reaction to one of her friends,
And Mr. Demmons responds very succinctly, "I did that."
questions about what transpired, was blatantly cold. 2 words: I took action. Later on, the DA would assert that this was a confession to murdering his own day ones. The streets and the DA claimed that the reason was a poisonous combination of gang politics, jealousy, and money that has destroyed more crews than the feds could ever hope to. The squad was experiencing severe paper issues as a result of Melly's appearance. All 4 of the homies were connected to the Gifford Slimes, or YNW Bloods, even though his success might have jeopardized their entire power structure. And someone usually ends up in a box when loyalty and bread start to conflict in the neighborhood. The fact that these guys were so close is the most messed up aspect. To let the world know that these were his ride-or-die brothers, Melly had actually tattooed their names on his face while they were still alive. These weren't just arbitrary opponents or rivals on the street. These were childhood friends who supported one another through all the turmoil, grew up in the same battle, and shared dreams about using music to escape the neighborhood. Detectives understood this wasn't just another hood drive-by because the bodies weren't even cold yet. The evidence they were about to find would disclose a cover-up so complex that it nearly succeeded on, show how far someone can go to destroy those closest to them. What began as a regular hood shooting investigation became one of the most intricate forensic cases the state has ever seen. And it was the investigation that revealed everything. The uncovered evidence would expose some extremely sophisticated criminal genius tactics, a cover-up so intricate that it nearly fooled the entire system. They locked down the Jeep and began questioning Bortlen about what transpired when Miramar police arrived at the hospital. His story was standard street talk. Some unidentified shooters pulled up and began firing as they were leaving the studio and making their way back to the crib.
And they sit and they walk side by side for an hour, that mile-long stretch, looking for evidence of this drive-by. Because evidence is the remnants a crime leaves behind. And in this case, the lack of evidence is very important.
However, the detectives discovered something that left them perplexed when they attempted to confirm his story. In an attempt to find any evidence of the alleged gunshot, the investigator closed up the whole mile-long section of Miramar Parkway between 160th and 172nd Street and spent an hour walking it. No shell casings, shattered glass, bullets, or skid marks were found. The outcome remained the same when they extended the search to a further mile. This was quite suspicious, given the Jeep's 16 gunshot holes, broken rear glass, and 2 shot outside windows. The absence of tangible evidence at the purported crime scene was odd to say the least. Bortlen's narrative was accurate. It was nearly impossible. A huge trail of evidence is left behind by drive-by shootings, particularly when there is this much gunfire. Shell casings from the attackers' weapons, glass pieces from windows that were shot out, bullet hits on surrounding structures or cars, and tire marks from quick acceleration or evasive actions. There was none of it. This was a serious warning sign for detectives who had handled hundreds of cases like this. The Jeep itself was severely damaged, which made the lack of proof all the more telling. The volume of shooting involved should have left significant traces at the scene, as there are 16 easily recognizable bullet holes, including strikes that broke many windows and entered the vehicle's body. Some of the bullets' trajectory indicated that they had gone all the way through the car, which meant they should have hit the road, guardrails, or nearby vegetation. However, no such proof was discovered. Another important fact that came to light during the crime scene technicians' careful search was that the scattering of glass surrounding the suspected shooting site did not fit the pattern of a highway attack. Depending on the direction of travel and the angle of contact, glass fragments normally scatter in a certain pattern when windows are shot out during a moving vehicle shooting. It appeared that the windows had been shot out somewhere else because there were no glass shards at the site. When researchers chose to go backwards, they made a breakthrough. When they followed the crew back to New Era recording studios, they found that there were cameras all over the place. The script was totally turned upside down by what they discovered in that video.
In the video, that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep, and that the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in the rear driver's side seat.
Melly was never mentioned by Bortlen as being in the car. The police now recognized that they had a missing victim who, if he wasn't actually a victim, should have also been shot up. Other discrepancies in Bortlen's story were also exposed by the CCTV film. Instead of the earlier time he had reported, the timestamp indicated that the group left the studio at 3:19 a.m. More significantly, the 4 men's easygoing manner as they left the premises was captured on camera. They showed no signs of conflict, stress, or worry for their safety, which is what you would anticipate if they believed they were being watched or singled out. Important background information regarding the group's activities that evening was also supplied from the studio's interior cameras. There were no obvious indications of tension or disagreement as the 4 men collaborated on music in the footage. Any idea that the killings were the consequence of an impromptu disagreement or confrontation was refuted by their interactions and body language, which seemed normal throughout the session. The thing that hurt Bortlen's credibility the most was perhaps the fact that he didn't bring up Melly's presence in the car in his first police questioning. This was a serious omission that implied intentional dishonesty, not a small mistake. Investigators came to the conclusion that Bortlen might be lying about everything that occurred that evening if he was lying about who was in the automobile. The inquiry then took a more advanced approach. Investigators would be able to examine every action and conversation from all parties involved in unprecedented detail thanks to cell phone data. In the end, their digital trail would be more harmful than any testimony from witnesses.
Because at that location is where the cell phones of Christopher Thomas, Anthony Williams, and Jamel Demons all line up at 4:02 a.m. At that point, afterwards, Mr. Demons' phone tracks with the 2 victims until about 4:20.
All 3 phones, Sack Chasers and Juvies, were at the same isolated spot close to US 27 and Penrook Road at 4:02 a.m. According to cell tower data, which coincided with the alleged murder, all of the phones moved in unison for 18 minutes. Until 4:20 a.m., as the others made their way to the hospital, Melly's phone broke off. Investigators were able to reconstruct the group's activities that evening, minute by minute, thanks to the accuracy of the cell phone tracking data. According to the phone, one vehicle continued to the gated neighborhood of Sunset Lakes, where some acquaintances resided, while the other vehicles traveled together across Interstate 595 before splitting up at the intersection of Miramar Parkway and 184th Street. The other went north toward farther and farther away places. Even more sophisticated information was uncovered by the digital evidence. Sakaza and Melly were on the same service plan and utilizing the same phone model, and this made it possible for investigators to follow their movements simultaneously with previously unheard of precision. According to the data, the 2 phones traveled together to the supposed isolated site of the killings, stayed there for the crucial amount of time, and then split up, with one phone returning to civilization and the other continuing on to the hospital. The phones provided vital activity and health data in addition to location data. Step counts from Melly's phone showed that she had taken 70 steps at the recording recording studio, 70 more at the alleged murder time of 4:02 a.m., and 1,397 steps between 4:42 and 4:53 a.m. significant physical movement at the period when he was reportedly making arrangements to be picked up from the crime site was indicated. By this digital trace, the setting was further clarified by the ballistics evidence. The drive-by tail was totally destroyed when detectives discovered spent round shells inside the Jeep.
Why is that important? That shows a gun was fired inside of that car,
demonstrating that shots were fired from within the car. There would be further proof at that fair-off place the cell data had identified. Investigators discovered 8 additional round casings from a .40 caliber firearm at the remote location that was determined by the phone tracking. 2 distinct shooting episodes were identified by the ballistics breakdown. The external gunfire that were fired to fabricate the fictitious drive-by and the internal shots that killed the victims. Important information regarding the chronology of events was uncovered by the forensic examination of the shot casings. Casings from a different caliber weapon than those discovered at the distant staging area were discovered inside the vehicle. This implied that the criminals had employed several weapons and had a sophisticated enough crime plot to try to skew the ballistics evidence. The fatal rounds were fired from within the car, specifically from the back left passenger seat, where Melly was seen seated in the surveillance footage. According to a trajectory study of the bullet routes through the vehicle, one may have fired across the car toward the front passenger seat and the right rear passenger seat based on the angles and entry positions. The accuracy of these shots and the victim's lack of defense wounds indicated the gunman was completely unprepared and close. The staging operation's deliberate character was also demonstrated by the ballistics evidence. Bullet holes were concentrated on the passenger side of the vehicle, and the exterior rounds fired at the remote location were purposefully directed to provide the impression of a drive-by attack. The angles and sites of entry of these shots, however, suggested that they were fired from stationary positions outside the car rather than from firing from a passing vehicle. The most damning evidence of all came from the medical examiner's findings, which demonstrated how cold-blooded and well-planned this entire operation was.
And the drive-by was staged at 4:02 a.m. The victims were already dead.
The external gunshot wounds occurred, according to the autopsy, to produce the drive-by effect. The stage rounds were fired into bodies after they had died. This demonstrated that the car had been shot up to provide the impression of an external attack following the killings. Digital communications that revealed the cover-up in real time were also discovered throughout the investigation. Melly allegedly began developing his alibi tale while at the staging location by FaceTiming his girlfriend. Additionally, he requested a pickup from the far-off place by sending location pins to his people. However, despite all of this evidence, the case reached a courtroom dead end. A hung jury decided the case when it went to trial in 2023. 4 jurors voted not guilty, while 8 chose guilty. There was sufficient reasonable doubt to avoid a conviction because of the missing murder weapon, motive-related concerns, and some dubious police work. Melly and Bortlen remained silent for years, defending themselves against the accusations and asserting that they had been the targets of actual street violence. However, there are limitations to devotion in the hood, particularly when life sentences are involved, and what transpired next would demonstrate how isolated, under genuine strain, brotherhood may devolve into treachery. Self-preservation always wins out over street code, as demonstrated by the fact that after 6 years of riding together through the case, the same loyalty that kept both defendants silent was set to crumble under the weight of multiple life sentences. When allegiance falters, it is the ultimate betrayal. In the YNW case, loyalty died on September 9, 2025. YNW Bortlen took the choice that would earn him a lifelong reputation as a rat just hours before his own trial was set to begin. He accepted a plea bargain that may have sent Melly, his boyhood friend, to death row. Bortlen had been strong for 6 long years, keeping his mouth shut and sticking to their account of being shot at bystanders. But even the most genuine street underscore begin to question whether loyalty is worth dying in a cave.
YNW Bortlen, he could took the deal. Where did I leave Melly though, brother? Where did I leave YNW Melly and the case?
When you're facing many life sentences and jury selection begins the following morning. There was nothing more remarkable in the timing. War preparations had been made by his lawyers. They had already summoned potential jurors. All of a sudden, everything was different. The charges against him depicted a young man who had been forced into a difficult situation by a system intended to undermine street.
Counts 1 and 2 is murder in the first degree with a firearm. Those are capital offenses. The maximum and mandatory penalty is life in Florida State Prison. Counts 3 and 4 are accessory after the fact to murder in the first degree. Those are each first degree felonies. The maximum penalty is 30 years in Florida State Prison.
allegiance. While Bortlen was playing checkers, the prosecutors were playing chess, gradually adding charges until he faced 5 possible life sentences, plus 75 years. What had begun as accessory charges had escalated into charges of gang participation, witness manipulation, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. As the charges against Bortlen developed, they demonstrated the prosecution's cunning and unwavering will. Bortlen was initially facing a manageable prison sentence that he could live after being prosecuted as an accessory after the fact, which basically means that he assisted in covering up crimes he didn't do. However, as the case progressed and prosecutors found it difficult to get Melly convicted, they methodically increased the charges against Bortlen in an effort to put more pressure on him to cooperate. A significant increase in Bortlen's legal risk was brought about by the addition of the murder charges. First-degree murder in Florida is punishable by a mandatory life sentence. Without the possibility of release, this rule was not negotiable. It was a strict legal mandate that denied judges any discretion in determining punishment. The possibility of never experiencing freedom again served as the primary impetus for a young guy who had already served years in prison, awaiting trial to reevaluate his allegiance. Charges of witness tampering and gang activities increased the exposure and complexity. According to these accusations, prosecutors thought Bortlen had actively attempted to thwart the inquiry and had done so as a member of a criminal organization. Bortlen faced numerous chances for prosecutors to obtain a conviction that would result in his life in prison because each charge held the possibility of a life sentence. Straightforward, methodical warfare was the DA's approach.
Now I know some of y'all are super thugged out in here. A life sentence, what? But when he was only facing 30 years, he was like, They added the murder charges afterwards to make that nigga know, oh, you think we only want Melly? We'll fry you too. I think that made him think a little bit different.
They continued to increase Bortlen's punishment, turning him from a man facing a few decades to a man facing several life sentences. The purpose of this escalation was to weaken his resolve and compel the precise type of collaboration they obtained. Bortlen avoided the murder charges entirely as part of his plea agreement. He admitted to 1 count of unlawful use of a communication device, 2 charges of accessory after the fact to murder.
In exchange for that, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty on the 2 accessory counts as well as the tampering count. I'm going to sentence you to 10 years in Florida State Prison. That will be followed by 6 years of reporting probation.
And 1 count of witness tampering in a capital case. The 2 murder accusations that would have earned him a pine box or a life sentence were withdrawn by the prosecutors in exchange. However, the shortened time was not the whole cost of this bargain. In exchange, Bortlen would have to give it up. Snitching was clearly included in the bundle, the judge stated.
I guess at some point after the fact, the state wants to take a proffer from you or have a discussion with you, ask you some questions about whatever that may be.
The most risky aspect for Melly is the proffer requirement, which is essentially a sworn declaration in which Bortlen must reveal all of his knowledge. Bortlen formally acknowledged that murders occurred and that he assisted in their cover-up by entering a guilty plea to accessory after the fact.
When pleading to accessory to murder after the fact, you have to acknowledge that the murder happened and you assisted someone or in some way to cover the murder.
Charges. One of Melly's primary defenses, that the murders were caused by a genuine drive-by shooting, is clearly refuted by this admission. Prosecutors have even more evidence thanks to Bortlen's DNA acknowledgement in his plea, which verifies that he was in the car when the crimes were committed. The harsh calculations that defendants in capital prosecutions must make were made clear by the arithmetic of Bortlen's ruling. Bortlen may be released in as short as 3 to 5 years if the structured sentence, good behavior discounts, and credit for time already served are all implemented. The decision became clear. A few more years of imprisonment versus never seeing freedom again, especially when contrasted with the certainty of dying in prison if found guilty of the murder. Allegations. Cooperation is only one aspect of the proposal required. The defense plan that Melly's team had developed over the previous 6 years has been completely dismantled. Bortlen would have to honestly respond to all inquiries regarding what happened on October 26, 2018. As part of the Queen for a Day session, he would be subject to the full force of the initial charges, and the plea deal would be nullified if he made any false statements or omitted anything. This establishes a strong motivation to be completely honest, regardless of the consequences for his ex-friend, because the agreement requires truthfulness and can be canceled for any fraud. The legal framework of the proffer also shields prosecutors from accusations that they forced false testimony. In the end, Bortlen's testimony will be based on sworn declarations he made under threat of forfeiting his plea agreement. Prosecutors are reassured by this framework that any information Bortlen submits will be trustworthy and defendable punishable under the law. Threat of spending the rest of their lives in the pen ultimately tore them, barred after years of solidarity against the charges. Despite the street code's insistence that you never fold, even the most resilient people begin to consider self-preservation when they face the prospect of death behind bars. Bortlen's betrayal is the final straw for Melly, who has been under lockdown since February 2019. His retrial is set for January 2027, and it is anticipated that Bortlen would cooperate and provide prosecutors with the inside information they have been lacking. The harsh reality of how the system undermines street loyalty has been made clear by the case. Melly's team has been outspoken in defending his innocence and denouncing the strategies employed against Bortlen, claiming that prosecutors are railroading an innocent man in their quest for a conviction at any costs.
Like, y'all know Melly done killed his two best friends. Like, come on. Like, we go through this every time with us, culture, being black, artists. Y'all know we targeted.
You are aware that we targeted. However, Bortlen's case's math presented a clear picture of the decisions defendants in capital cases must make. The decision was straightforward: freedom to see his family again versus allegiance to a comrade, especially when he had already served years and faced the possibility of dying in a jail. Both defendants bear the visible effects of years spent behind bars.
Melly looks defeated, man. It's been 7 years, bro. It's been 7 years. He looks defeated, bro. He looks defeated.
The consequences of extended confinement were apparent when Melly showed up for a bond hearing. It is impossible to overstate the psychological effects of extended confinement in high-security settings. Melly has been in custody for more than 6 years, much of which was spent in tight conditions or solitary confinement. His physical and mental health have clearly suffered as a result of the loneliness, uncertainty, and ongoing stress of facing possible death. Before a conviction is reached, these requirements themselves may turn into a kind of punishment, according to legal experts. Thank you for viewing. If you enjoyed it, click on one of the recommended videos that is currently displayed on your screen to continue the trip and see more incredible material.